We demystify what goes on behind the therapy room door. Join us on this voyage of discovery and co-creative conversations. This is the Therapy Show, Behind Closed Doors podcast.
With Bob Cooke
and Kellie Barratt.
Hello and welcome to the Therapy Show Behind Closed Doors. I'm Kellie Barratt and I'm with the wonderful Mr. Bob Cooke. Hello, Bob.
Thank you very much. I do like that title. After 4 years of Jackie saying that,
Yeah.
I couldn't do the podcast without that, I think.
Channeling Jackie all the way. So, Bob, today we've got a very interesting title of what happens in the therapy process if we don't like our clients, and does it matter?
Over to you.
Well,
You've been working for a very long time.
And I imagine that people who aren't therapists imagine us therapists as like these all loving creatures that don't get irritated and like everybody, and that's not true. So I was thinking about how important it is in assessment to get a feel, to see if we can work well together. There's a bit of a difference for me of not liking somebody, feeling irritated with them or frustrated with them. And the third bit is when I don't, I'm not aligned with their value system.
So while I'm fiddling around with this light to make it a bit more light, tell me about that. That's really interesting.
The kind of the obvious ones where, as therapists, we shouldn't take on clients that we can't, we don't think that we've got the skills to work with. So. If it's a very stark.
Have I gone lighter, by the way?
You have, yes. We got.
I put a new light on. I was listening to what you were saying there. So what you're saying, if I've got this, the importance of assessment.
Yes.
Now I think assessment is really important here, and I always get dismayed about how much time people do or don't give to people on assessments. And, I think that if somebody just gives 5 minutes to somebody in an assessment or 10 minutes to an assessment, often things can go awry later on in the clinical treatment.
Yeah.
So I think half an hour is a good time, personally, or 20 minutes to do the assessment. And if you feel, your terms of reference or your value systems don't meet, then that might be a reflection on whether you think you're the right therapist for them.
Yes. And that's the time to sort that out and say, actually, I don't think I'm the one for you, or I don't think I've got the skills, or however we kind of phrase that. If we go against that, I think we get a bit stuck further down the line.
Yeah, I was thinking of a colleague of mine who was talking about a client he'd had, I don't know how long, who was an arch Trumpian supporter.
Yeah.
Very, very right wing and very, I think he was American, or I didn't know because I've never asked that question, make America great again, but those right wing values. And he was having problems because he's so left wing.
Yeah.
Such a socialist. And he needed to sort of, bury those, if you like, look at the clinical concerns, which I'm sure he did very successfly. It's interesting what you're talking about. That's an obvious one, but there's many others I can think of.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, for some people, they might struggle to work with a sex offender, for example, or, somebody who's violent in a couple, or something. And we've all got different ideas, haven't we, or different value systems. But sometimes misaligned with how someone might choose to parent. And that's the client's frame of reference. So it's not for me to come from my frame of reference when it's, when they're deciding that.
Yeah, and I think, you're very fortunate, and I was very fortunate for 40 odd years, and you've been working, I don't know how long, but at least a decade. Probably.
Yeah, over a decade, yeah.
Well, yeah, many, many, many years. We're both fortunate that we work privately. Now, if we were in an organisation or the NHS or whatever it is, we're just giving clients. and maybe we don't have that luxury
Mm.
to say go away. I wouldn't say go away like that. That luxury to be able to have an assessment to say perhaps you're not the right therapist for me, for example,
Mm.
and they get foisted with all kinds.
Mm. I've never thought about that. That is a fascinating idea. Yeah, so those therapists still have to work with the clients that they're given.
Yeah, because
They can't.
I was thinking of Mind, I was thinking of the NHS, I was thinking of Beacon, I think of Nerd, I can name many organisations where the person is employed.
Yes, yeah.
And they don't have let's put it, in an ideal world, the organisation should have a good assessment system.
Yes.
And that's not always the case.
Mm.
And secondly, of course, would the therapist have any access to that assessment person who's actually, doing? Now, in my organisation, I do the assessments, but I've known the therapist. They're usually trained at my institute, so I know them. So that comes into the equation, but it doesn't necessarily in organisations, and certainly not in the NHS.
And so, I mean, I'm assuming those therapists keep taking it to supervision and working it through.
Yeah. But I agree with what you said about assessments. I think one of the other really big indicators here is our own countertransference.
Yes.
And our own history. So, for example, as I've said this on a podcast, and some many maybe do or don't do, I was adopted. Now, I've done a lot of therapeutic work on many of the themes that come up around adoption and my lived world. However, if I hadn't done, for example, then I wouldn't really take anybody on who'd been not adopted, not because I don't like them particularly, but because some of the things might come up which trigger my own issues.
Yeah.
So there might be that's a clear one, but there may be lots of counter-transference responses where I just don't like that client for X, X, and X, which is actually more to do with the therapist or counsellor than the person in front of them.
Yes. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Because I was thinking about the client transferring what they don't like about themselves onto us. But of course, yeah, if we've not done the work, our own therapeutic work, then that's going to get stoked the whole time we're working with that client. It will be too hard.
So I've had many clients where I thought I don't really like them for whatever reasons. Now, how can I explain this? I know that when I've got to their younger selves, TA they call that child ego state work, and I get to the vulnerable parts of the self, then that my projection of not liking the client usually dissipates.
Yeah.
Because I see a much vulnerable, younger, and in that context, really perhaps understand their behaviour.
Yeah, and their defensiveness. It's like it's come from somewhere.
Whatever it is, yeah.
Yeah, because they're just we're all just got our own little kids inside us.
And I do think that that's the crux of most of this. I've only once in my 38-year career somebody, I don't think, because I didn't like them.
Yeah.
For reasons to do with what you started off with saying, which is their frame of reference and values and things like that. I just said, I think the second session in, I didn't ask them. In fact, I said to them, you don't have to pay for this session. I don't think I'm the right therapist for you. And we talked about that for a bit and what that was all about. And the third ones are someone else.
Yeah.
That was to do with me, actually. I've only done it once in my life, and if I could turn back time, I wish I hadn't.
You wish you hadn't passed them on.
Yeah, because no, that I hadn't said I'm not the right therapist for you.
Yes, yeah. So you'd work with them.
Because I know what it was about.
Mm.
But the real bit was that I hadn't done the therapy myself to be able to work in an authentic way with that person. So it was a mistake in some ways, because I think if I'd have worked with a person and got to underneath their defences or their child ego state, or however we want to look at this, then we might have had a different outcome. But I do know that many people that I perhaps dislike, once we get to what's really underneath everything, and we look at the context of in their younger histories, all their behaviour makes sense.
Yes, yeah.
And usually the don't liking, projection I have or had dissipates.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a lovely way of thinking about it.
What about you? Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
It does. It's rare that I don't like somebody, actually. So I'm always checking myself. Is this mine? Is this mine? Is this mine?
Yeah, and I think that's true. And so there's that I wanted to say. Most of this don't liking business is our own counter-transference.
Yeah.
If you can work through that and understand that, and get to see the younger part of the self, which might be a parallel of course, our younger self or whatever, then things often change.
Yes, yeah.
The other sort of dimension to bring into this is what you said earlier on, is clients who want to come over in a very dislikable way on purpose.
Yeah.
Or we could even say out of their awareness.
Yes. Yeah.
Or we could say they're testing therapist. Yeah. So I think that's important to bear in mind, that you said it earlier on. The clients often don't want all these bad feelings, XXX, and will project them onto the therapist. So the question is, where's this all come from? Is it mine or is it theirs? Is the question to ask.
Yeah. And if I'm feeling it, then I think, well, that's what the client's feeling a lot of the time. So, and that's pretty tough or pretty rough. So it's like, it could, if we can work through it, then they can have a different experience.
And that's the key. If we can't, we might refer on.
Yes, yeah.
Or if it's going to take ages, for example, you might refer on.
Yeah.
I mean, supervision is vitally important here.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think about our caseload, because if it's going to be a lot of work and a lot of counter-transferential stuff, and we haven't got the energy for it or the space, then we need to do something with that too, I think, because it does take up more time.
Yeah, because we might make mistakes in the assessment period, because I completely agree with you. I think the assessment is vital. And we may not have done the therapy on the part of ourselves, but usually most of this is counter-transferential. It doesn't mean that you might not say in the assessment, I don't think I'm the right therapist for you. Yeah. So I think it's important to give ourselves permission, and trainees permission, just to say that, look, in the assessment program, you don't have to work with everybody.
Yeah.
There may be reasons why you would refer on. Usually they don't like it, but it's usually the counter-transference of the therapist. But I think it's important to take into consideration and take to supervision.
Yes, yeah. And some of my difficulties would be if the client's very angry, and because of my history. So, but actually, when we have worked through the anger with the client, and they get a different experience of it, but I also get a different experience of it, and so it's useful for me, but it's also as well as very healing for them. But it does take a lot of energy and a lot of work, or more work, I should say.
That's right. And the other reason that you may refer on, besides, well, I know that part of this podcast is about not liking clients, but you might also linked in with that is if they don't follow a contractual framework.
Mm.
For example, like for example around confidentiality or around self-harm, or if you think of risk assessments, all these things, if they're not going to, work towards a healthy process, testing boundaries, being all the things we could think of, turning up drunk or turning up with drugs or whatever it is. I think it's very important to take the supervision and give yourself permission to refer on.
Yeah.
Because it won't be in the service of the client that you stay with somebody you find perhaps even beyond your experience.
Yeah. I remember when I was training, I think one of my supervisors or my trainer says something like, do you want to be, you don't want to be waking up in the middle of the night worrying about this client. And I was like, oh, that's such a good yardstick, actually. I want to be working within my skill set and my capabilities. And if I'm worried, then I don't want to have to hold on to that or hold that space.
That's right. And I think our own developmental level of experience plays a large part on who we may or may not refer on.
Yeah.
But I do think, assessments are very important, and I don't think enough, in my experience, perhaps therapists may not give enough time for assessment, because that would be the period that you would say that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I do the 20-minute assessment and then always have like an introductory session, and no offense taken if the client doesn't want to work with me at the end of that session. There's no, or vice versa if I don't think I've got the skills. I'd much rather sort that out then.
And I think it's very challenging in organisations. People could just be passed to, and anybody could be passed to you. And I think organisations perhaps don't take into consideration the developmental level of the therapist, people they're passing on to them, and even may not take in consideration, does the therapist have adequate supervision that they can take all these things to? And do they do their own therapy?
Yeah, because if that, our supervisors will say, won't they, you need to take that to therapy, whatever comes up in supervision. So I mean, I'm certainly always in and out of therapy. So that's a really safe space for me to explore all of that stuff.
So I do think you can give yourself permission to refer people on, by the way.
Yeah.
And I think supervision in your own therapy is the key to understanding your own counter-transference process, because often it's about yourself rather than the other person.
Yeah.
Now, I always feel that therapists, counsellors who don't, for whatever reasons, and maybe it's not even in the training, by the way, to have time to reflect on their own processes, will down the line, therapy or counselling will be more challenging.
Yeah.
Because they haven't reflected to the level they need to, or they haven't had the support for that process.
Well, we can do that in private practice, can't we? Because I leave a good 20 minutes after each client to do that processing. But I've heard people working in the NHS who, it feels like a bit of a factory line.
It is. How aggressive they would work, though, because mostly it's CBT in the NHS, and I know there's, especially this with borderline clients or more disturbed people, with dialogical behavioural therapy. But I would always recommend to the person, if they can afford it, to have some therapy themselves in a supportive process. Certainly, they need good supervision.
Yes. Yeah. I absolutely agree. It's vital.
It's an interesting call, and I don't know if it's taught in the training, because when people have placements, in organisations.
Mm.
Again, if the organisation doesn't do a good assessment, they can get people that they feel very challenged by, usually because they're not experienced, or usually because they haven't done therapy on themselves. But I think in the training, we need to teach trainees and beginning therapists to say no.
Just generally, or to referrals?
Maybe generally in their own life, I don't know. But I meant particularly if they find clients obnoxious, or they don't like, or triggers their own counter-transference, or any of these things, and send them back to the assessment process. Now, the problem is very, very few trainees do that.
Yeah.
And the other side of it, they can learn by their mistakes, if you wish. It's all grist to the mill.
Well, that is one way in, isn't it? To kind of, get the therapy, get the supervision, and learn as you go. But yeah, I think that permission to be able to say no is that sounds really supportive.
And of the client, actually.
Yes.
Because the worst thing is in a relational psychotherapy, where you're working with people that you find challenging for whatever reasons. Not much is going to happen in terms of therapy.
Yeah, you won't get to the deeper stuff.
No, and I'm a great advocate for therapy. People listening to this podcast will know this, and I'm a great advocate for supervision. I think those are the two supports when working with clients that we might find challenging, that we really need to use.
Yeah, I tend to think of when something comes up, it's a bit of a mirror. So the client's showing me something about myself.
Usually, always.
So it's my job to go and process all of that.
Yeah, and if you can't get to supervision next week or the week after because you've got to wait a month, talk to your colleagues.
Yes, like peer supervision. I do that all the time. Like, I'm struggling with this. What do people think? It's really useful.
And just think about another way around. Clients haven't got that luxury.
No.
They're usually caught in their own script and their own system. They haven't got a supervisor or a therapist to help them sort out the process. That's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, because the other, down at the bottom of the list of all of this, I was kind of thinking that if a client, if we're not liking the client, that is probably something that's happening out there in the world for the client regularly.
It might be. If it's not to do with us.
Yes, if it's not to do with us, and there's something happening in the client's process, then that is a great place for them to work that out. Once we've got that working alliance, we can be addressing.
Yeah, and if the therapist can stay an adult, rather than be triggered in some ways.
Yeah.
And yes. Now, there are exceptions to all this around taking care of ourselves. So I remember I was supervising somebody the other day, quite a new therapist, and it's really to do with the assessments again. But they assessed this person, decided that they would work with them, that it was on Zoom, and the first session, he turned up naked. Now, that's what I'm saying. There are exceptions.
Yes.
Where you would refer that person on.
Yeah.
Or there are. I was thinking of people who work from their home, for example. If they feel intimidated, I think of women, or even men as well, but I was thinking particularly, I suppose, of women, but I could be men who feel intimidated as well. They need to really think about whether they're going to work with these people. That is why the assessment is so important.
Yes. Yeah, and sometimes, what you're talking about there is probably a bit of an instinctual thing of like, oh, something doesn't feel right about this.
No, that person was very disturbed. It's decided to come from an oppositional stance. So I gave you a really dramatic example because in terms of reality, especially if you're seeing clients from home, if you feel intimidated or whatever it's about, don't carry on. Talk to your supervisor. Yes, work it through, but don't just stay where you feel unsafe.
Yes.
Because nothing will happen. Now, the client might be enacting some things out in the therapy room. If you're very experienced, maybe you can work through that whole process, but maybe you're not. Maybe you've just started out as a beginning therapist. So you need to be able to have boundaries, as I say, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, people's behaviour.
Yeah, and it's really, and it's okay to say no. Yeah, that's a great tagline.
Interesting podcast.
Yes, I mean, wonderful title because it's intriguing, isn't it, about like not liking our clients. But yes, and really interesting about that. Checking out, is it ours? Is it ours? Is it ours? And working it through.
I'm thinking of writing a book on these podcasts.
Great idea, Bob.
Something like, I don't know, the therapy journey from a unique podcast perspective or something.
Yeah.
And I do it in themes. So I look at the 200 name, we look at all the themes, and I'd write chapters through the themes of things that came up in podcasts. And this would be in it. Yes.
Yeah. Because we are important as therapists too. It's not all about the client.
Really, really important to think of self-care.
Yeah.
To think of our developmental experience. To set boundaries. To take care, because unless we can do that, how can we take care of our clients in a relational perspective?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And something like this is always a good wake-up call.
Couldn't say truer here. Okay.
Lovely to see you again, Bob.
Well, past 30. So what's the next one?
So the next one is number 209 will be 565 models of therapy in the UK. Is a model of therapy really crucial for the therapist?
Yeah, well, we'll cut it down. Let's just say, because I can talk about the 565 brands of psychotherapy. Let's just go to do effective psychotherapy. Do we need a model of psychotherapy?
Okay, well, let's say goodbye to the listeners, and then we can work that out together. Thanks, Bob.
We can work that out together, and then we can give let's put it another way. The listeners could have it as a surprise, the anticipation of what we're going to talk about. And that's far better.
Wonderful. See you next time, Bob. Take care.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Therapy Show, Behind Closed Doors podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. We'll be back next week with another episode.